Before we begin, listener, remember to gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Tonight, I'll take you through the quiet halls where the walls still breathe, where every sound means something, even when no one's there to make it. 5 stories, each one a whisper left behind by those who never truly left. So, turn down the lights, lie still, and listen carefully, because some sounds don't stop when you wake up. At exactly 3:12, the silence remembers how to speak. It does not return as a scream. Screams are hot things, quick and foolish. This is colder, patient. A single drop landing somewhere far down a tiled throat of corridor. One drip, then another, a metronome for the dead. Drip. A pause, impossibly long. Drip. The second sound reaches the ear more slowly than it should, as if the building were breathing in before it dares let the sound out again. And in the distance, behind the drip, something else waits to be heard. Something made of brass and dust. A tremulous, aching note that isn't quite a tick and isn't quite a toll. They didn't give me a name. Names keep things alive. The locals, when I asked at the petrol station, called it simply the old place. A nurse with sunburnt shoulders counted my change without looking up and said, "Don't try the hill after dark." The way she said the hill told me it wasn't the incline she feared. I went at dusk. The road climbed into trees that had learned to hunch their shoulders. Kudzu wrapped itself round road signs until the arrows pointed nowhere. Ahead, like a carcass with glassless eyes, the asylum emerged. Civil War brickwork, long and stern, wings thrown out to either side as if to embrace what it had once held. Over the main doors, a lintel of granite, mottled with lichen, the color of old bruises. Inside, the air was kind to microphones. It swallowed sound and gave back only the softest versions of footsteps and breath. Tiles had loosened and risen like scales. A wheelchair lay on its side, one wheel still turning slightly when I passed, disturbed by nothing more than the slipstream of my body, or something that had just moved out of sight. I told myself I was here to work. My camera bags were heavy with good sense, batteries charged, lenses wrapped, a little pouch of silica gel that had saved me from damp more than once. But what I carried most of all was the habit, that quiet, stubborn habit of hunters and archivists to go on, one measured step after another. The corridors narrowed and widened in ways my eyes struggled to measure. On the second floor, I found a room that lifted itself immediately above the rest. A lounge, perhaps, where the doctors had taken coffee and pretended their hands were clean. The ceiling flaked like the backs of old photographs. A fireplace crouched under a mantel crowded with dust. Books slumped on shelves, their spines cracked into smiles. And there, against the far wall, too grand for a hospital, too theatrical for the honest business of medicine, stood a grandfather clock. Its face was filmed with the kind of grime that comes not from use but from neglect. The hands pointed to a nonsense hour. The pendulum sat perfectly at ease at the bottom of its arc, like a breath that never needed to be let out. When I stepped closer, dust rose and fell in gentle weather systems. The glass of the case was crazed with tiny, spider-thin fractures, each one catching the last of the evening light and snapping it into threads. My throat tasted of copper, a trick of damp air or old wiring. I rubbed the back of my neck and told myself it was the temperature. When I lifted the camera, the room gathered itself around the lens, and for a moment, the world became simple again. Lines, shapes, exposure. Decay has a way of arranging itself for the eye. Chairs at angles that suggest conversations nobody remembers. A cup holding a fossil of dark at its bottom. A door that cannot decide how far to close. I took frames. I worked the edges. I let the mind go quiet and the hands do the remembering. Down the hall, behind me, water found a way to be water again. Drip. The washroom waited at the corner where the corridor kinked left, as if unwilling to give you a clean line of sight. The door was marked with a painted word, half peeled away, gentle, just enough of a courtesy to make a person sad. Inside, porcelain had learned to be chalk. The basin was crazed into a map of places no one ever visited. Pipes, amputated and capped, lined the wall like bones set to dry. Every window had been hammered into frosted blindness long ago, but a gentle silver found its way in anyway, as if it had been promised. Under that light, the mirror lived. Not lived the way a face lives. Lived the way a pond does that never sees wind. The glass held its breath. If I moved, the reflection seemed a fraction late in catching up, a shy twin trying not to be seen. And yet, in the basin, in a bowl that held the dust of decades, a single bead fattened at the lip of a rusted tap. It hung there, thinking, then let go. The fall was tiny. The echo was not. Drip. The sound took its time, deciding to be a sound. I looked up at myself. The lens around my neck explained the weight on my chest. A tiny white freckle near my jawline. I always forget about. Explained the boyishness I never entirely lost. Behind my left shoulder, where the door hung open, there was only corridor. But in the mirror, the corridor's light was thinner. In the mirror, it shivered slightly, as if someone walked there a floor above, a floor below, or inside the glass itself. I turned quickly, silly as a child, trying to catch a magician mid-trick. Nothing. Only a draft slipping along the skirting board, unspooling a thin ribbon of cold around my ankle. Drip. I said aloud, to no one, old pipes, and heard my voice come back to me with the wrong expression on. Back in the lounge, the smell changed. Less mildew, more something that remembered polish. Wax that had once been warmed by hands. The clock, of course, explained it. I stepped closer. My fingers hovered above the glass. I didn't touch. The instinct to keep fingerprints off history is strong in people who use cameras. The pendulum had not moved. I told myself the washroom sound was a curiosity to be logged and ignored. A building this old keeps its secrets in damp. Nothing more. I set the tripod. Slow legs. Thumb and forefinger on the brass clasps. The rhythm of setting a shot is a kind of prayer. I framed the clock inside the mantel, and the two armchairs slumped like men who had finally allowed themselves to nap. My watch ticked on my wrist. Not musical, not grand, but ordinary, and so brave. The minute hand lifted its little spear to a mark that made me straighten. It had not been my intention to stay long enough to learn how a place behaves at 3 a.m, but the road down looked mean in my memory, and my eyelids had begun to feel like pockets full of sand. One more frame, I told myself. One more. Then I'll go. The washroom cleared its throat softly. Drip. A breath of cold passed along the hairline at the back of my neck. Not a gale, not even a draft. The kind of cool, laid-down hand that makes a newborn quiet. Don't, I said, and my voice pretended I had meant the word for myself. Night folds inwards in a very particular way, just before it remembers the time, 3:12. You won't know it if you don't listen. The dark grows honest. It stops telling you that you are alone and starts telling you that you are not. The clock, which had been an arrangement of stillness, thought, then changed its mind. The pendulum twitched. Not a swing, not yet. A tremor that moved through brass like a held breath let out between clenched teeth. Dust lifted in the case and hung, hopeful, like a congregation invited to kneel. The second movement rolled into a first swing, wide, heavy, where a healthy clock would click like a throat cleared. This one gave a sound low enough. It felt under the ribs, a resonant hum with a ragged edge, as if the air had to be persuaded to be parted. Not tick, not talk, something closer to a groan made polite. An ah from a mouth that had forgotten language. Behind me, glass caught the taste of movement. The corridor, in the reflection of the lounge's blackened hearth, thickened, not with smoke, with people who were not people anymore. They came in by degrees, as if better at entering the world sideways, shoulders first, then the suggestion of a chin, then the absence of eyes where eyes ought to be, at the edges of their coats, fabric frayed into mist, at the cuffs, the threads lay like veins, uniforms that knew too much about blood, buttons greened, a torn strap, a patch someone had mended while a hymn was being sung. The smell arrived after the sight, iron like old pennies, sweat gone sweet, laudanum, leather that had slept in rain. Mouths opened and closed without sound. Names, if they had names, stayed with them. A hand rose, hovered near a face, paused, put itself down again. They were not looking at me. They were looking at the clock. Every head turned slowly toward the brass, with a reverence too careful for the living. Drip. Not from the washroom now. From somewhere inside the mirror, the water found a way to belong. The pendulum gained confidence, lengthening its arc with the poise of a blade practicing obedience. Each pass stirred the air. Each pass pressed a note through timber, a moan near the frequency of mourning. Floors remember the weight of wheels. Walls remember the pressure of hands that knew how to hold a shoulder still. The camera in my palms acquired a little tremble that did not belong to me. I raised it anyway. Habit is a harness we fit ourselves with. It holds even when the horse is bolting. The first frame, the room click, the fireplace click, the chairs click. Each shutter a nail tapped lightly into the wood of reality. The fourth frame showed him, closer than he had any right to be, behind me, in the glass of the clock, in the curve of brass. His face slid into view as if it had been waiting just behind my outline, learning the shape of my breathing. A doctor's coat, but the color of it had forgotten itself. The fabric hung from him in tired pleats. His hair lay clean against his scalp, as if regularly brushed by a careful hand that had never loved him. One hand rested on the pendulum's polished bob. The fingers were long, historian's fingers, musician's fingers, a luthier's touch, a man accustomed to making things sing. The expression wasn't a smile. It had too much hunger in it, but it pleased him to be here. That was obvious. The eyes had rain in them, and something else besides that wet alertness of someone about to decide what you are worth. I lowered the camera. The room did not lower with me. The bodies in the shine of the hearth drew breath without drawing breath. The doctor took his hand off the brass and laid it on my shoulder. Nothing touched me. But the body, poor animal, flinched as if it had been chosen. I turned. The room was empty in the most elegant way. A room can be empty utterly, and with confidence. The clock continued to swing. finding a rhythm that felt more and more like a catalog of names being read from a list. One of the chairs sighed, though no one sat down. "Sir," I said to Air, because politeness has saved stranger things than a man in an old hospital. The pendulum answered with a note so low the glass in the windows thought about answering. From the corridor, a curtain I had not noticed before lifted itself and fell again. Teeth of mold along its hem dragged the cold across the floor like a comb. My watch clicked softly on my wrist. The hands lay like a body had lain. They declined to move. I looked, I don't know why, to the mantelpiece where the remains of a photograph album slept open. The pages had fused with damp long ago, but at the corner where one leaf tried and failed to lift, the paper quivered as if someone had just turned a page 2 floors away. Drip. The sound landed in the middle of the room, impossible and precise. My mouth tasted of camphor. My tongue, oddly heavy, found the word please and held it ready. I don't know if I said it. Something in the corner of my left eye brightened a fraction, as if a door had opened in the glass behind me, and strong daylight was about to pour in. I turned my head slowly, because slowness seemed the only currency the place respected. The mirror in the washroom was now level with the lounge. That is a poor sentence, but it is the truest one. The corridor had lengthened, or the building had rewound itself, or the glass had admitted it was a mouth that could eat distance. In the depth of the mirror, the lounge appeared again, and I stood there still. And behind my mirrored self, the doctor leaned. He was closer in that world, close enough to smell the starch on him, close enough that the reflection of my breath clouded on the inside of the glass, not the outside. His hand hovered a whisper from my shoulder in the not me. I watched the reflection tense, waiting to be touched. The pendulum's next pass sounded like a name. Not my name, but a name I nearly recognized, the way you recognize the shape of a song your grandmother hummed when you were too young to speak. The doctor's lips shaped words. No voice came out, but I felt meaning arrive anyway, the way thunder delivers itself to bones. Not yet. The phrase slid down the room, cool as a hand against a fever. I tried to laugh. I honestly did. A dry little cough of a laugh, as if to say, "Caught me out. Old house. Well done." But the body knows the difference between humor and awe. The breath I meant to waste on a laugh went instead to the instincts common to rabbits and sundials. I backed towards my tripod. The camera's screen, when I woke it with a thumb, offered me thumbnails of what I'd just asked it to remember. The first, the fireplace. The second, the chairs. The third, the clock in its majesty of rot. The fourth, the doctor's hand on the pendulum. The fifth, I had not taken a fifth, but a fifth existed. It showed my shoulder a fraction lower. It showed my ear bent in a shape that belonged to a different second. It showed the doctor's hand no longer resting on brass. It lay on me. In that frame, my face had already begun to understand. I scrolled back, forward again. The first 4 remained as they had been. The fifth, each time I returned to it, invited the doctor's palm to inch nearer. The difference was a law of fractions, less than a hair each time, but inevitably more. The pendulum in that frame blurred now with motion, a smear as graceful as a wound stitched shut while the patient still breathed. I raised my head. In the world that thought it was real, the room held its poise. In the world inside the hour, the doctor's face lowered towards my ear, as if to offer the intimacy of a confidence. "Not yet," the air said again, but not to me, to time. The washroom smelt of gone soap and a grief too old to wash clean. When I turned my head to check the door had done what doors do, stood where I left it. But the corridor beyond had mislaid several yards of itself. The angle had changed. The distance to the stairs had altered, not dramatically, but in the way a good tailor can take in a suit so subtly that only the wearer truly knows. A wheel rolled softly along the hall. No chair followed it. I gathered the tripod by instinct, folded legs by memory, packed hands into familiar work to put small fences up against the large thing coming. I kept the camera around my neck. Some superstitions are practical. "Thank you," I said to the room, and the hum in the wood came back with something like acknowledgement. Then I left. The outside did that unfair thing it sometimes does, pretended it had always been a normal night. Crickets counted a long, simple arithmetic. The car waited with the same posture it had when I arrived. In the rear-view mirror, the asylum sat squarely on the hill, unruffled as a book that no one had dared mark. My hands shook enough that the keys rang against one another like small bells. Once the engine decided to behave, the headlights measured out the road in exact yards. Gravel ticked under the chassis. Trees leaned in to peer, then leaned back as if shy. At the first bend, the radio woke without being asked. Not with a station, with static that had learned a note, the long, ragged hum of brass in a wooden case, a pendulum parting air into left and right and left, carving out two alternating rooms for the heart to move between. I drove faster than I meant to. At home, the flat welcomed me with its ordinary, a kitchen that remembered the morning's tea mug, boots left where a better man would have put them away, the clock on the wall above the bookshelf, bought at a charity shop because of its honest face and its refusal to pretend to be older than it was. I didn't look at it. I made the kind of tea you make when your hands want work. The measured rattling of spoon against ceramic, the slow approach of water to leaves. Steam rose with a softness I tried and failed to use as armor. I held the mug. I let it say, "Be here," to my skin. When I finally looked, the clock on the wall had stopped. The second hand stood neatly on the 6, polite as a footman. The minute hand, the hour hand, both pointed with the calm certainty of a compass to a single place. 3:12. The flat has no pipes near that wall. The neighbors never use their bathroom at this hour. The roof is new. The landlord is cheap, but not neglectful. And yet the sound began under the stopped hands and moved very slowly through the plaster, then the paint, then the air. Drip. I set the tea down and watched the surface. Remember, small weather. Drip. The sound did not concern itself with distance. It had learned me. That is the simplest way to say it. Wherever I chose to stand, the drip arranged itself to be just beyond the place my eyes could rest. I went to the bathroom and turned taps that worked. I let the bath splash itself into civility, then closed the water and watched the last of it find the drain. I listened. The flat went as quiet as it could out of kindness for me. Then, from the wall in the bedroom, measured and faithful, came the pendulum's hum. I slept eventually, or the body did, even if the mind had decided on a vigil. Sleep in such circumstances is a kind man staying to keep you company in the waiting room. You doze, and in the dream the chairs are green vinyl, and the nurse at the desk has her hair pinned the exact way hair was pinned in 1963, and the clock keeps moving its hands to 3:12, no matter how often you blink. In the morning, porridge was in the kettle, as it often is. tea again, toast that remembered heat, the camera on the table, sullen as a child asked to wash a dish. I plugged it into the laptop and watched the machine inhale the night. The first images were as they should be. Dust made architecture. Shadows made promises they could keep. Then the frames with the clock. Then the frame with the hand. The fifth image, the one I had not taken, had altered itself in the night. The doctor's hand lay flat on my shoulder. The thumb, with a tenderness that humiliated me, had curved towards the throat, as if to feel for a pulse. The mouth now was near the ear of the man that was me. His lips shaped something neat. The syllables did not change, but my understanding did. What I had felt as "not yet" when I was afraid now revealed a second clause inside it when I was tired enough to listen properly. Not yet, but soon. I closed the laptop very gently, as if quietness were something I owed to the dead. For the rest of that week, objects in the flat elected to be elsewhere. A spoon I had not moved lay under the bed like a small fish that had lost its way. A photograph from a drawer I rarely opened stood on the mantelpiece, though no one had framed it. I found myself standing in the corridor at home one night, without knowing why I had walked there, listening to water in a place with no tap. When the nights darkened early, the drip made a new friend. The static on the radio, at the turn of a dial, gave a soft not unlike breath. Metal in the window frame answered at the edge of hearing. At 3:12, not every night, but often enough that I learned how to wait for it, the wall clock trembled as if glad of an excuse, then said nothing more. In the silence, after its small death, something made of brass and memory sang without moving. I don't think it means me harm. That is the sting in it. The doctor in the photograph has no malice in his mouth. He leans towards the ear to offer a kindness that men of his era mistook for care. Rest, restraint, narcotic, and the bed straps tightened just enough. The hand on the pendulum is merely the hand of a man who has found a rhythm and feels responsible for maintaining it. What frightens me is not cruelty. It is the competence of the dead. You learn, if you listen long enough, which sounds belong to buildings and which belong to hours. The drip belongs to the hour, the pendulum too. They visit where they like. They travel with you the way a phrase from a song follows you out of a shop to the bus stop and across a bridge and into your kitchen, humming at your shoulder until you hum back. Some nights now, the sounds yield to a different sign altogether. Lying on my side, half asleep, I feel the curtains settle near the window. No wind, no draft, no open vent. Yet the fabric takes a breath in and lays itself against the back of my hand, as if someone had placed it there, as if someone were standing on the far side of the cloth, palm flat against it, waiting for me to press mine back in answer. A hospital curtain is a poor wall. It remembers everything, lotion and bleach, and the private weight of people who needed to be held up while they were being made clean. When the fabric moves in the night, when it inhales with me, when it says, "Not yet," with the ordinary patience of cotton, I do not open my eyes. I know better now than to look too quickly. I know better than to ask the room to prove itself. Because some proofs cannot be survived, and some kindnesses arrive colder than you expect. We will walk into that next place, you and I, the one with the white curtains and the whisper that stands just beyond them, but not yet. Soon. Story 2. The Lake House Under a War Moon. Returning from the asylum, I carried its hour with me like grit under the eyelid, the pendulum's low hymn, the patient drip that knew its way through walls. Those sounds rode home in the quiet parts of me, daylight softened them but never solved them. In the end, I bribed myself with distance, a few days away, a different kind of night. Water instead of walls, sky instead of corridors. So I took the lane that unwound to Lake Guntersville, where Alabama hills lean their ribs against a long black sheet of water, and let the moon dress it in silver. A wooden house waited there with a porch like an outstretched arm, white paint freckled to the grain, a pair of rocking chairs whose creak was the only language they had ever learned. Forest behind, lake before, a simple geometry. Distance, I told myself, would translate the echoes into silence. But distance, when it comes to certain hours, is only an accent. The speech remains. The air by the lake moved in long thoughts. Pines stood with the old patience of witnesses. Their shadows fell in tall bars across the porch. Midges performed small mathematics above the water. Somewhere under the planks, the lake gentled itself against the pilings and remembered that it had once been a river, asked to be a lake. I unpacked ordinary things with ordinary care. Camera bag set by the door, notebook on the kitchen table, a mug that had survived enough sinks to be trusted. The house offered a practical kindness. A quilt folded on the arm of a sofa, a bowl of conkers on a sideboard, 3 books left behind by previous tenants who had decided to rest from finishing them. From the porch, the view was almost plain. A curve of shore to the right, a finger of land to the left, and in front, the water breathing under a moon that had not yet decided whether to rise high or to hover low. That first evening, I made a small supper and listened deliberately to ordinary noises, the ripple of a page, the shift of timber as it cooled, the sigh of a fridge content with its own low work. I told myself the quiet here was different, cleaner, chosen. Near midnight, the lake corrected me. It began with how the rocking chair moved. I had not sat in it. I had not touched it. Yet the chair made one slow bow forwards and another back, wood speaking to wood in a long hinge sigh. Wind, I thought, then noticed my forearm hairs lay still. The air did not pass through. On the water, a crease formed where no boat made a wake. The moon wrote itself across the surface, a pale road, and something traveled along it without showing its shape. And from far across the black, a sound bit the night clean in two. Bang. Not fireworks. Not the cheerful haphazard of celebration. This was disciplined. It struck, waited, struck again. Bang. The old brain made its old arithmetic distance, direction before the new brain could finish building excuses. The third shot lifted the small bones behind the ear as if they were little doors. Rifles, muskets, a sound left behind by a century and a half, crossing water like a message that could not bear to be forgotten. Between the 2 shots, I heard the faintest sound of men who wanted to be silent, but could not breath held in a certain way. Leather whispering, where leather always whispers, the roll and pause of feet in formation. And as the moon climbed, the water put down its mask and showed me the first of them. Not on the porch, not on the path, in the tree line, at the edge where forest met, shore, darkness clotted into shoulders and caps, and a row of heads bowed over rifles. Their faces were the careful blank of men taught not to look like themselves. The line did not move, yet I could feel the weight of it shifting minute by minute, the way a hill shifts in your understanding as you walk its length. Not here, I said softly, to the same no one I had spoken to in the asylum. Not tonight. Canned isn't tiled. The chair creaked once in answer, a mother's kindness or a warning to hush. The lake kept breathing, as lakes must but something had changed the rhythm so that every exhale smelt faintly of sulfur, a little ghost of burnt powder, a match blown out after it has served. When wind finally did arrive, it carried not cool but warmth, as if the air had been set to work too near a forge. From the shore to my right, where the bank made a gentle notch, the moon found metal. It drew a seam of light along a barrel, and then along another, so that the line of rifles became a row of thin moons, each one trembling with the hand it belonged to, each one still because command had been given to be still. The trees behind them held their breath. The lake ahead of them held its sentences behind its teeth. I rose slowly, so as not to argue with whatever law of stillness I had wandered into, and stepped to the edge of the porch. The boards gave a soft talk under my heel, a short, domestic sound that seemed indecent in the presence of these old attentions. I told myself I would take no photographs. Not tonight. A lens is a mouth. I did not want to feed on this. Yet I looked as a lens looks, and the night obeyed in the way it sometimes does when you have learned to ask without haste. Faces arranged themselves along the line, not distinct, not the rude clarity of a flash, but enough to know them as human. A nose disciplined by hard living, a jaw refusing to be what it had been, an eye on the far side caught by the moon into an unbeautiful gleam. One man's hat sat wrong on his head as if borrowed. Another's shoulder was white with the dust of marching. A third's fingers lay so gently on the wood of his rifle that for a second I mistook his grip for a caress. Smell is the last truth. It told the rest. Cloth worn rainy, leather laced to wet skin, the iron, the old blood turned brown and sweet, the memory of horses, a thread of tobacco that must have been hidden but could not help speaking. Down the shoreline to the left, where the land fingered out, I saw not a line but a shape wider and lower artillery. I thought first, but then it corrected itself into the square shadow of a boat's low hull hauled partway up. Dark canvas slumped over boxes that had the wrong quiet. My throat remembered the taste it had learned in the asylum thin copper. Knuckle dust, not fear, anticipation's shadow. From the woods behind me, a voice arrived so cleanly it might have been spoken at my shoulder. "Dress the line," it said, and the syllables stepped across the lake with a courtesy that made my hands want to obey. Nothing in front of me moved, yet the line was dressed, as if the command had been heard some other night and was still being completed, second by second, with that economy the dead like to keep. The moon climbed higher. It was one of those moons that makes everything into a map. Trees became notation. The shore kept its ledger, and on the water, pale as ink left too long in a saucer, a second line appeared men again, but these standing not in the trees but on the pale road the moon had laid. It is a trick of light, I told myself. The road is only a reflection, but the men on it were not reflections. Their shadows fell in the wrong direction. The water took their boots without complaint, yet made no splash. They stood where men should drown and waited to be spoken to. At the notch in the shore to my right, someone's mouth opened. I did not hear his voice. I felt the words push against the air, shaping it into an order I had not been invited to know. Rifles rose as one. The moon found the sights. The lake forgot being a lake and remembered being a field. The forest's first row of trunks stiffened into spectators. Hold, the air translated to me. The line on the water lifted nothing. They stood with empty hands. Poor, in that beautiful way, the dead are poor. One turned his head as if to find a face he'd misplaced. Another bent as if a strap had come loose and refused to be properly tight. The wind left the smell of sweat and laudanum on my lip. "Fire," the world said, and the shore obeyed. The first volley peeled the skin off the night. Smoke is an animal. It ran low along the ground, sprang, rolled, and lay panting at the water's edge. The boom of the volley reached me as a wall, not of sound, but of pressure. It pressed the porch boards down and lifted my ribs. The rocking chair shuddered, lifted one leg, set it down again, the way a horse acknowledges a rider's decision. Light stuttered across the water muzzle flash in small tongues. The line on the lake took the bullets with the gravity of men refusing to rehearse their deaths as a drama. One turned, not as if struck, but as if a hand had gently redirected him. Another folded in the middle and kneeled to look at something only he could see. A third remained where he was because he had always remained where he was. The sound that followed the volley arrived broken into its parts. The crack of shot, the brief scream a bullet makes when it tells a tree to be a different shape, the hush of water remembering how to accept. Load. The command moved through the trees. Metal and wood made their old conversation. My own hands twitched with a muscle memory that did not belong to me. Powder measured in habits. Ball seated with a firmness just shy of cruelty. A tamp, a click, a breath. Make ready. Ready. On the water, the empty-handed men did what empty-handed men do. They held their ground with a discipline that mocked good sense. The moon spread itself thinner to accommodate the scene. The smoke learned to lean, present, and sell for as. The second volley did not surprise the night. It welcomed it as a room that knows where you like your chair. One of the men on the water lifted his head in the half-second before the shot reached him, and although I could not have seen his mouth clearly, the shape of it agreed to a word I knew as well as I know my own. Now. The cry that rose from the tree line did not come from the mouths of men. It came from the shoulders, from the hands. It was the sound a body makes when it is willing to be owned by a purpose. It is not courage and not submission. It is the complicity animal life enters into in order to survive for another 10 seconds. The line advanced 3 paces. The water did not sink under them. The porch shifted behind me, as if another set of feet had stepped to the edge to see better. I did not turn. I have learned not to give the night my back. Down. A voice called not to me, not for me, but I went down anyway, the way you duck under a branch. You cannot help ducking under, though it is already past. A bullet gave the porch post a neat new mouth. Splinters leapt and vanished into the long grass. Out on the water, a man fell backwards too gracefully. His hat left his head, as if being excused from duty. The third volley never came. Something in the night decided discipline had had its time. The sound changed from measured strikes to a tearing like cloth taken in 2 hands and pulled, then pulled again because the first tear had not satisfied. Men ran. Orders were given and not heard, and given again with a thinning voice. Somewhere very near, boot leather skidded and recovered itself on the dock's damp boards. My throat learned to taste coins. Then quiet. Not the blessed quiet of a finished storm. The military quiet, the beast drawing breath between blows. It was in that humming hush that I realized I was no longer simply watching. Far down the porch, where the moonlight did not reach, an upright figure leaned against a post. At first I took him for another of the lake's witnesses, something the house had left there as part of its skeleton. Then my shoulder corrected me. A weight lay there familiar as a camera strap, precise as a hand that belonged to a rule. The skin beneath it cooled, then warmed, then cooled again, in a sequence the body recognizes from mornings on fields. where dew and breath converse. I did not turn. I looked instead at my own hands, which had found themselves in a posture they had not known they knew. The left cupping something, the right ready to draw a ramrod and seat a charge. I had brought no rifle to the lake. I had not held one in my life. But the itch between the thumb and forefinger, the readiness of the wrist to welcome recoil, the particular angle at which the elbow begged to lock, these were not inventions of fear. They were rehearsals leftovers. Around me, the smells arranged themselves into an order that included me. The sulfur welcomed another voice. Leather sought the salt in my sweat. The smoke turned and looked at me and decided it remembered my outline. When the next order moved through the trees, my body rose to it like a dog to its name. Steady, said a memory that thought it lived in my bones. Across the water, a figure lifted a hand, a loose sign that was not quite a wave. He had no face I could properly name, but he had my height, and in the moon's arithmetic, his left shoulder sloped the way mine does, after too many hours carrying weight on one side. When he turned, my knee ached the way it always aches when the weather changes. I have seen myself in shop windows. I have seen myself in morning mirrors, with the mouth still trying to decide what age to be. This was not that. This was the night proposing a version of me that had been borrowed by a battle and not returned entire. Not yet, the lake said, and it was not a mercy. The porch post behind my head took a second bullet. Wood dust tickled my cheek. From the tree line, a man I could not see shouted a name I did not recognize but understood belonged to me all the same. The last of the smoke went to its knees and crawled forward, as smoke does when it knows you intend to meet it halfway. The world narrowed to sights and breaths. I counted 1 for the heart, 2 for the lungs, 3 for the tiny hope that the next breath will be allowed. When the command came advance, I felt my calf muscles receive it. I felt the porch, which I had not left, shift under the weight of a boot I did not possess. I felt my hand empty in one world raise a barrel in another, and aim it not at the men on the water, but just to the right of them, where a ripple became a shoulder when you had learned to see properly. And then the lake, generous as ever, returned me to the porch. The lines remained where they were, preserved. I had not moved. I had only been moved through. The men on the water looked thinner now, as if moonlight had been asked to stretch too far. The men in the tree line stood as though made of wet paper that had remembered it used to be wood. The chair at my side creaked once, consolingly, the way chairs do in church, when no one can act the truth, and so everyone agrees to sit a little harder. By 2 in the morning, the volleys had spent themselves. The lake arranged its breathing into long lines again. The smell of powder withdrew to the far side of the pines and pretended to be sap. The porch cooled under the soft moon. I went inside and closed the door, not because doors keep such hours out, but because doors teach hands a ritual that is soothing to perform. Sleep took me the way a competent nurse does, practiced, without fuss, willing to keep watch over the parts of me that would not. What followed was not a dream in the bright, foolish sense. It was a training ground the dark had kept for me. I marched distances that did not require feet. I loaded with a concentration not my own. I listened for a word that would free me from listening and did not hear it spoken. Faces filed past in the good order of men asked to be brief. Some of them might once have been mine. All of them belonged to the lake now. At 3:12, of course, at 3:12 I woke to the sound of brass remembering its work. Not a clock this time. Something smaller. The careful clink of cartridges, though these were not cartridges but powder flasks and balls set down on wood by hands willing to repeat their routine forever. The sound came from the kitchen table, where I had laid my camera and notebook. I did not move. I learned from the asylum that you must sometimes let the hour finish its sentence. The table agreed it had been touched. The notebook had shifted by less than the width of a finger. The pencil lay at an angle that had not previously pleased it. The lens cap rested upside down, as if to receive a measure of powder. I made coffee I didn't drink. I took my camera to the porch and did not lift it. Light came with a reluctance that matched my own. Day admits what night invents more often than we pretend. The lake wore no scar, but the air moved with the self-consciousness of a room after arguments. By noon, I had packed. The house stood with the quiet of a soldier at parade rest still, but ready to speak again if asked. In the car, the radio refused music and offered static that hummed in a frequency I recognized from wood and brass. I drove the lower road to avoid the ridge. In the rear-view mirror, the lake lay with its face turned up like a child who has been forgiven. For the rest of that day, the world tried its best to be ordinary. Traffic decided on its small aggressions. A dog barked at a post and felt justified. A woman on a corner turned her head the exact way I had seen a man turn his on the water, and for a moment I thought ridiculously that she might be about to give a command. Night brought sleep that had ambitions. It wanted me back on the porch. It wanted me between volleys. It wanted me ready to receive a hand on the shoulder that would not burn and would not bless. When I refused to stand, it walked around the bed and sat at the edge and waited. In the deep of morning, just before the hour who loves me most, the dream spoke at last, in a voice that was several voices laid one atop another, so that age and rank and weariness and belief all said the same thing. You were there. Not accusation, accounting. The cry that rose over the water, the hinge sigh of the chair, the measured violence of men trying to keep their shape under orders. None of us would have written, "These are mine to carry now." And though I left the lake, though I put miles between us and lanes and proper towns, the sound of loading powder poured, ball-seated. Rod drawn and driven visits the quiet moments. Between the kettle's boil and the cup's fill, between closing the door and it latching, between breath and breath. The body remembers quicker than the mind forgets. You asked for silence. I tell myself, when the radio becomes brass and the kitchen becomes a table set for powder, and you were given a lake. You asked for distance and were given a road in the moonlight. You asked not to be owned by an hour and were given a command. Now, when weather turns and the world cools along the edges, the fog rises from parks, from river mouths, from fields that once held drills. Walk through it, and you will see them if you keep your head an honest height above your shoulders, faces cut from damp, eyes borrowed from light, mouths that hold the shape of a word they endured. Sometimes the fog gives me back to myself as one of them, a profile I recognize without wanting to, a posture that fits, a hand that knows where to rest when the order comes. I do not stop walking. I have learned that stopping is a way of agreeing to disappear. But I look, and in the look, there is a promise I do not yet know how to keep. To follow that face into the place where it was first made, into the fog that doesn't burn off at noon, into the memory that chooses you and will not let you choose otherwise. We will go there, you and I, into the weather that makes a person into a shape and keeps it, into the field where names have not finished being spoken, into the road where the moon writes a message we pretend not to read. Not yet. Story 3, the faces in the photographs. It was a clean night, the kind that behaves itself. Work, for once, had pushed the ghost hours to the edges. I had returned from the lake, unpacked the last of the jobs that paid the bills, and let the quiet put its hands around my shoulders. I opened the window a cautious width. Air came in, cool and reasonable. The forest beyond the estate wore its dark tidy, as if someone had brushed it flat. A glass of red, a cigar whose ash kept its posture. I set the glass down beside a shallow bowl of matches and watched the match heads stare back like a small, docile crowd. The flat agreed to be simple lamp pooling light over the table, the soft hum of the fridge, the distant lift working out its old bones in the stairwell. Then the wind forgot itself. It did not swagger in from the trees. It did not march along the gutter. It arrived as if the room had taken a breath too quickly and lost hold of it. A sudden whirl pushed through the open casement and moved with purpose across the table, across the stack of contact sheets I had printed and never sorted, across a box of 6x4 seconds I had meant to bind with twine and label. My cigar laid down its ember with the decorum of a gentleman. The glass trembled, just once, as if the wine remembered waves. Paper lifted. It did not spill so much as choose. A top sheaf turned. A second rose and sailed. A third slid like a fish breaking surface. Photographs flicked into air and fluttered down, face up, face down, face up, landing on rug, on chair, on my shoe. The sound was delicate, a dry whispering like thin feet crossing a chapel. And as quickly as it arrived, the wind withdrew. The curtain settled into obedience. The lamp's flame of light steadied. Everything returned to its shape. Except me. I had set the cigar in the dish. I had raised the wine. I had meant to taste. But the body knows rehearsals better than intentions. I put the glass down untouched, knelt, and reached for the first card as if it might startle. It did not. It waited. For weeks, I had asked work to keep the old sounds at bay. Photography is busy with the small, honest tasks that ask the mind to be present, setting a white balance, coaxing a lens cap gently off when the thread sulks, noting address and time on the paper sleeve, weddings, portraits, a series of old houses for a local council brochure, humble labor with humble rewards. The clicks and the scribbles filled up hours that might otherwise have belonged to brass and water. Evenings, I let myself play at ordinary, pasta forgotten by 5 minutes, washing up water a fraction too hot, a book left open at a page where a character was about to make a poor decision, and I did not have to watch. When sleep came, it came as a clerk on time, with a neat ledger. The wind undid all that in a minute and a half. Outside, the dark showed a cooperative face. Inside, dust settled in a slow ballet, its flakes aligning with some current I could not feel on skin. I looked at the cards the wind had chosen. The top one had landed with its back up. I turned it gently. My fingers had not forgotten the feel of gloss, that shallow resistance of a surface that wants to be handled by clean hands alone. The photograph was from the asylum. A corridor, tiles lifting like scales, the seam of a crack running up a wall with the confidence of ivy. The frame lived where I remembered it. Blurred dust, a light bloom on a broken window, the minor glamour of ruin, and yet there, in the glass of the door at the end of the passage, a shimmer not of light, but of attention, a pair of eyes, faint, as if someone behind the door had leaned and then thought better of it. Had I seen that before? Had I missed it? Had the enlarger teased a detail the contact sheet had ignored? I reached for another image, the doctor's lounge, the grandfather clock, dust arranged as weather. I had printed this one large because the brass face settled the composition, and I wanted the hush that old clocks force a room to keep. But the hush did not hold the frame. At the edge of the glass, just where the pendulum case began to curve, a mouth had found a way to suggest itself no more than a change of darkness. The gloss lifting by a fraction, a form that might have been coincidence if not for how faithfully it pursued the shape a mouth takes when it has something it would like to say and cannot. I told myself the brain wears faces like spectacles. It makes you see eyes where there are two marks and a line. I told myself I was tired, though I was not. I told myself the wine would argue sense back into me, and then I did not drink it. On the rug, a third photograph had landed at my knee. I picked it up, and the shy, old sweat of my palm met the cool of the card. The washroom mirror looked out at me. I had caught it the night it learned to be a pond. The light went in and did not come out again in the same order. In my first look, it had been only a piece of furniture that had forgotten it had belonged to a wall. Now, in the lower left, impossible to miss, now that the eye had been taught where to find it, someone's cheekbone, someone's ear, pressed just enough into the world to declare itself real. Behind my ear, the night found the old corridor sound it loved best and laid it down softly. Drip. The flat has no taps that do not obey. The radiators were mute. The neighbors had the kindness of strangers in the middle of a week. I steadied my breath and reached for another card. It was not a corridor, not a room. It was a face. Not a face I knew. A man, not young. Hair combed with the seriousness of older decades. A parting that had learned to be exact. He looked into the lens through an expression that was not a smile, but was not unkind. His mouth had learned to carry reassurance and did not quite know where to put it now. The detail was not mine. I had never stood in front of him. I had never, in any honest sense, taken this picture. Another face beneath it. A woman with a fringe that belonged to a year whose color films had loved too much. She did not look at me. She looked a few degrees to my right and down. The angle of a person watching their hands receive instruction. In the background, the shape of a chair whose outline had no business being in that room. A child in the next frame, perhaps 7, perhaps 8, their eyes too large because the lenses of children always are. In the pupil, if I brought the card close, the smallest suggestion of a figure tall, pale, an approximation of a coat. One after the other, the wind's curation revealed itself. Faces that belonged to a place where faces were not supposed to be found. Faces in rooms where no one had posed. Faces in windows filmed with grime. Faces in the brass of the pendulum case. In the puddle on the washroom floor that should never have been watered. A gallery of looking where, on the night I had taken them, there had been only me. Sweat arrived without the decency of heat to earn it. It flowered under the hair at the nape of my neck. It learned a path along my ribs and made me aware of every inch of skin under shirt. Gooseflesh ran its long, methodical finger down my arms. Wine went sour in my mouth without being tasted. I had not invited the asylum back. It had known the window when I opened it. I stood, and the room altered its geometry, the way rooms do when the person in them has remembered something they did not want to remember. Corners deepened. The lamp's halo folded in on itself. The quiet went from comfortable to listening. I collected the photographs as a penitent collects little stones, not in order, not by size, but by the urgency of the gaze that called me. I spread them across the table, an irregular constellation. I stepped back. The faces were not placed to make a picture. They were arranged to make a sentence. At first, the grammar resisted me. I tried rows. I tried columns. Words do not like to be stacked that way. But when I followed the tilt of a chin in one frame to the direction of another pair of eyes in the next, order softened. The first man, hair parted with older accuracy, looked not at me, not out of his own card, but to the right, to the next photograph, where the woman with the fringe ached to look down and left. Her line of sight fell exactly uncannily upon the child's shoulder in the picture below. The child did not look back. The child gazed past me, towards the washroom's reflective dark where, in another print, a cheekbone had pressed its wish to exist. Paper touched paper, slivers of white margin meeting. The cards made a path across the wood, like stepping stones laid for someone else's feet. My hands found themselves shaking, not with fear exactly, but with the careful concentration of a person lifting a sleeping infant from one bed to another without waking it. At the far left of the arrangement, the doctor's lounge waited for the next card. I placed a photograph of the pendulum beside it. The brass had caught an old light. Within the curvature, I could have sworn a mouth had opened wider than before. A trick, I told myself. The power of sequence. But tricks do not make your collar cooler by degrees. Tricks do not coax the hair at your forearms to stand as if greeting a draft. Somewhere in the room, something remembered 3:12 and came to its feet. The wall clock did not deign to stop, but a little fatigue entered its tick, the way a voice enters the last hour of a vigil. A breath of cold slipped in from the window without moving the curtain. It lifted the paper nearest to it by the width of one ghostly nail. On the margin of the bottom right card, bare, except for the corner of a door and the suggestion of a shadow, someone had argued into the world with the weakest pencil. A brownish fleck had dried where no ink should be. I brought it close to the lamplight. It was not a stain from printing. It had the dullness of very old blood, but it had dried in the precise sharp of a letter. Why? I put the card down. Another bore a smear. The smear, under the lamp, resolved itself into 2 strokes that agreed with a blow. The next card insisted on the upward tilt that makes a U. I had not printed these marks. No pen had traveled this table since supper. Yet as I moved the cards by degrees, as a dowser moves a stick and pretends not to, the sentence began to form. You must. The body knows when a message is going to be completed. It tightens before the last words arrive, the way stone hardens just before a chisel finds the right angle to split it. Come back. The room did not thicken. It became very thin. The distance between my skin and the air withdrew to almost nothing. I could hear the sound a camera strap makes when it is lifted too slowly to creak. I could hear plaster cooling behind the paint. On the window glass, condensation had written its own punctuation. I breathed in carefully, as if the air might be scarce, and I were obliged to share it. Back where, I said, though the sentence knew where as well as I did. The pendulum photograph darkened a fraction, as if the brass had leaned forward to hear me better. At 3:12, of course it was 3:12, the modest clock on the wall forgot the next second. It stood, hands in a neat, unhelpful V, and allowed the room to decide itself. The faces decided first. A trickle of silver ran through the gloss, not wet, not melt, but a loosening, as if the emulsion had been reminded of being a surface that once agreed to hold something and now might release it if asked politely. The first man shifted the weight of his attention. The woman's fringe altered by the width of a hair. The child's pupil grew a fraction, as if learning to admire the light from a door opening just beyond the photographer. From the washroom mirror frame, a photograph of a reflection, The cheekbone yielded into a jaw. The jaw found a mouth. The mouth kept itself shut with the ceremony of someone keeping a vow at a graveside. The flat did not darken. Light bent modestly to attend. I heard the little language of wet boots that need to be quiet and are doing their best. Paper, which ought to lie still, rustled of its own preferences. The curtain heaved as if a person had reached for it and then decided to wait one more second. Air traveled across my collar and made the neck sweat cold. And the cold said, "It is time to be honest." Honesty took the shape of my name, spoken not aloud but in the place behind the ears where orders take root. It arrived in a voice not my own and not his from the lake, and not the whisper in the asylum, but a composite of them, an agreement of voices. I did not run. The body will offer that cure for everything, but some rooms do not allow it. The flat was suddenly vast and terribly intimate. Every centimeter of air knew me. There was nowhere else to go. The closest photograph lifted its margin and laid it gently over the next. A card tenderly closing a card's eye. The sentence changed, or rather, revealed a clause I had not yet earned. "You must come back. We are waiting." Waiting is the hardest thing the dead do. They do it better than us because they have the time. The cigar on the dish chose that moment to die with dignity, giving its last curl of smoke to the low ceiling. The smoke remembered the smell of sulfur from the lake. The sulfur remembered coals. The air remembered a fire kept somewhere it was not supposed to be kept. Wind moved in the room without moving the curtain. It had the texture of a breath taken under water. The pendulum sound arrived not from the wall but from the table, a low, disciplined hum made by brass that had found an hour it wanted to serve. Then, as gently as a lens cap finding its thread, the flat returned the air to ordinary. The clock accepted the next second. The lamp filled the corners. The photographs lay where they lay. I stood in the small aftermath and listened to the kind of silence that remains after an argument when nothing has been solved and everything has been said. There is a point past which disbelief becomes a costume. I did not have the energy to dress in it. I reached to gather the cards. The top one washroom mirror yielded under my fingers. The cheekbone had become a jaw. The jaw had learned its mouth. And in the mouth's corner, a tiny divot, a scar I knew intimately, because I had not shaved carefully one winter when the light was poor, and I had cut myself, and it had learned to be permanent. I lifted another card. The child's eyes had held a figure. That figure had lengthened. It wore my sloped shoulder. It held its head at the angle I hold mine when I think I am not being watched. The woman with the fringe, her gaze now fell not on a blank corner, but on a point just to the right of where I stood. I followed it and found nothing but the corner of the table, except that nothing is a large category, and in it, if one is patient, a person can sometimes make a place to stand. I closed my eyes. Behind the lids, a field of color breathes. In that field, the woman waited, the way a person waits at a crossing for a hand to find theirs. "Who are you?" I said, though the answer had more to do with when than who. The last card in the path was the one I had not wanted to find. It had fallen farther than the rest, near the skirting board, half under the chair. I eased it out with the forgiveness of a hand that has learned to be gentle with corners. The image was a portion of the doctor's lounge, the clock's brass, the mantle's edge, and there, just off center, the side of a face, turned away, recognizable because we are all experts in our own outlines. My ear, my jaw, my hair refusing a comb in the same disobedient place. The treacherous kindness of recognition parted the body from its pretense. My mouth went dry, and the tongue adhered to the roof, as if punishing me for earlier luxuries. Sweat forgot where to sit and went everywhere. The room retreated not in distance, but in depth, leaving a thin corridor between me and the table, where only truth could pass. The faces had not merely appeared in the photographs. The photographs had remembered them because I had brought them there, because I had stood where they needed me to stand, because I had been a lens for an hour that used me as its glass. I had told myself the asylum was an address I could leave. The photographs corrected me. They were not evidence. They were invitations. The cards lay for a long time. I did not rush them back into their sleeves the way a child pushes a scary book under the bed and pretends the bed is a vault. I let them stay. I learned the pattern of their breaths. I watched condensation make a small river on the window and disappear into the frame. When at last I gathered them, I did it deliberately, speaking names where I knew them, and where I did not, saying, friend with my mouth in the old way, one thanks a stranger who has held a door. I placed the stack beside the camera bag. The bag has its own intelligence. It knew when wait meant leaving, and when it meant only that a person wanted to feel they might. Wine waited in the glass, but it had learned a bitterness that would do neither of us any good. I poured it quietly into the sink and watched the red take the porcelain into its confidence and then allow it to be clean again. I rinsed the ash from the dish. I closed the window. The curtain consented to be still. The lamp's circle held. At the edge of hearing, where a fridge hum is music and a hallway is a reed, the pendulum kept a prayer. I slept on the sofa because some nights ask you to be courteous to your own bed. The room breathed. The photographs dreamt. I sank in the way a person sinks when the sea and the shore have not agreed where they end and begin. The dream returned with its own register, not the lake's orders, not the asylum's corridor, though I smelled tile and old soap as if someone had thought the place should be washed in time for visiting hours. The dream was a stairwell that led down, down, until the steps became part of my breath, and my breath became part of the counting. 1, 2, 3, always 3, and then the soft hand of 12. At 3:12, the flat woke me by doing nothing at all. No click, no whisper, only the exactness with which the silence took its posture. You know it by now. Listener, it is the quiet that makes you aware of your eyelashes. In that quiet, the faces spoke not with mouths, not with words, with the weight of their looking. They set it upon me like a coat. You carry coats because it is weather. There is no malice in it. I rose and knew the road back before I named it. I wrote a note to myself with that small, stubborn hand a person uses when they are being watched. Batteries, spare cards, tripod, porch, water, salt. I added thanks because it seemed impolite not to. Morning allowed itself to happen. Kettle, tea, a piece of toast I let go cold. On the landing, the lift reconsidered its position and decided to be useful. Outside, the trees pretended to have slept. The sky offered the pale that means fatigue. The car greeted me like a dog who has realized you intend to leave it behind and loves you anyway. I did not tell anyone. Whom would I tell? That paper in a sensible flat had asked me with old, patient eyes to come back to a building that had learned how to be a mouth. That the hour 3:12 had written me a letter with stains. There are some errands one runs without mentioning them, because the mentioning would make the errand mean less. I drove with the radio off. The road unwound. The town let me out politely. The hills, undecided as ever, offered their shoulders. Every so often, where woodland thickened, a curl of mist lay in a ditch, as if practicing being a larger fog later in the day. Once, as I passed a lay-by, the air turned the smell of matches, sulfur, and a sweet that did not belong to any tree. The smell did not belong to me, but it chose me anyway. At the top of the ridge, a slip road led to a row of houses that had learned to wave at one another across gaps where other houses should have been. Names clung to their letterboxes with admirable bravery. A wooden sign leaned at an angle and asked in chipped paint that visitors respect the past. The arrow below it did not know its left from its right anymore. Beyond, the road narrowed into a suggestion where tires had once compressed mud into memory. I took it slowly, the way you enter a church you have not paid to maintain. Ferns regarded the bumper and decided I was not worth fussing over. A stream considered the idea of being a road, and for a few feet succeeded. When the first roof line of the abandoned village appeared, it did not appear all at once. It pressed its smell ahead of it. Not rot, not mold, not damp paperwork, smoke. The cousin of gunpowder, the cousin of candles in rooms where they should not be burnt, the particular bite of sulfur, and under it a sweetness like flowers that have learned they will be asked to lay upon a box. I stopped the car and listened to the engine finish its private work. The pendulum in my head agreed to stand. The photographs in the bag turned their faces down of their own accord, the way you cover the sleeping. The message on my table had been simple and complete. You must come back. We are waiting. The wind had chosen the gallery. The faces had found their sentence. My name had been said in the place where orders live. Now the air, here, on the edge of a village that had learned to be left, offered the next words in that same low register, an addendum for those who kept their appointments. Come where the smoke remembers. The path into the village lay under a thin veil of fog that did not belong to the hour. It had the color of breath. It had the patience of waiting rooms. It curled at the edges, as if tasting names. And in that sallow veil a face began to form, not a stranger this time, but a version of someone I had once promised to be. A shape assembled out of damp and light, a mouth I knew rehearsing a sentence I had not yet heard. Faces in glass, faces on paper, faces in fog. We will follow them, you and I, down into a place where flames do not show themselves, but where everything smells gently, insistently, of having burned, where a village remembers a night it will not allow to end, where the dead have practiced their patience until it shines. But not yet. Soon. Story 4. The shadows beneath the clock. The smell of burning carried me back. Not smoke from a fire, not the acrid breath of a match, but something older, folded deep into the air, a faint sulfur, a sweetness of charred wood, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath for too long. And by the time I reached the asylum, I realized it had been waiting. The building stood unchanged, its stones blackened by moss and years. The same warped gate leaned against itself like an old drunk who could not stand. The same windows opened into nothing. Yet that night, the air felt different. Alive. Like a throat clearing itself before it spoke. I walked the corridors with a strange calm. Everything was as I had left it, tiles flaking, plaster peeling, echoes settling into their old corners. The pendulum clock still stood in the main lounge, proud though motionless, its hands frozen in an hour that had lost its meaning. But this time, the air carried light. It was the winter solstice, the longest night. The moon hung low and cold, pushing its way through the cracks in the boarded windows. Its pale blade of light cut across the corridors, bouncing from shard to shard of broken glass, from rusted mirror to fractured tile. The asylum became a hall of reflections. Silver fragments blinked alive in the dark, like eyes. And all those eyes, little by little, began to guide the light toward one place, toward the clock. I watched as the beam settled onto its brass face. The pendulum stirred, the air thickened, and then, bong, the clock sang. Not the polite chime of brass on brass, but a deep, wet toll, as if the sound had traveled through stone and bone before reaching me. The pendulum swung once, twice, and stopped at exactly 3:12. The toll awakened more than the room. Every mirror I had passed now carried a shape, not reflections, shapes, elongated, awkward, their edges twitching. One bent backwards as though its spine had been broken and taught to stand that way. Another crawled along the glass with limbs too long. A third was so tall its head brushed the top of the frame. They didn't leave the mirrors. They lived there, pressing themselves against the glass as though the asylum had pressed them into its skin. The drip of water returned, echoing from every corridor, not from one sink, but from all of them, a choir of dripping in unison. The asylum was awake, and I was standing in the very center of its attention. I felt myself pulled toward the clock. Its brass face gleamed under the moonlight like an invitation. And then I saw it. A seam. The clock did not rest flush with the wall. There was a fine line, almost invisible, running along its edge. My breath caught. My fingers trembled. The air behind the clock seemed colder, as though something waited there. I took hold of the wood, heart hammering, and pulled. With a long sigh, the clock shifted. Behind it, a door. The handle was iron, rough with rust. My hand shook as I turned it. A puff of stale air hit me in the face, the breath of something that had not exhaled for a century. The door opened onto stone steps, leading down into darkness. Each stair was slick with damp, worn by feet that had walked them long before me. I lit my torch and descended. The sound of the asylum faded behind me. The air grew heavy, damp, carrying the mineral tang of earth and something else, a faint sweetness like rot. The staircase ended in a corridor carved from stone. Its ceiling was low, pressing me down. On either side, doors waited, heavy, iron-bound. Each one bore a small window with rusted bars. I approached the first. Through the bars, my torch found a room no larger than a closet, and inside bones. A skeleton slumped against the wall, still wrapped in the tatters of a uniform. The jaw hung open as though it had been shouting when it died. A musket rusted by its side. The next room held another, and another, some in hospital gowns, the fabric yellowed and brittle, others in soldiers' coats, some alone, some curled together, their bony fingers still locked as though clinging for comfort. Every cell told the same story, locked in, forgotten, abandoned when the war passed, as though the people had been too inconvenient to remember. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My torchlight shook across the corridor, and then I saw movement. Not from the bones, but from the shadows on the wall. They shifted, reached, their mouths opened in silent words. And I understood. This was the root of the asylum's hunger. Not madness, not haunting, but memory. These were the lost. And I had found them. In the last room, I found something different. The skeleton sat upright against the far wall. Its skull bowed. Its hands rested neatly in its lap, as though it had chosen dignity even in death. And on the wall behind it, scratched deep into the stone, were words, "Do not let us disappear." And the letters shook under my light, carved by desperate hands, but they had endured. I sank to my knees. For the first time since the asylum had called me, I did not feel hunted. I felt needed. The shadows in the corridor leaned closer. They did not lunge. They did not claw. They waited, watching. And I understood what they wanted. Recognition. Release. Someone to see them, to remember them, to carry them back into the world of the living. My voice broke the silence, low and shaking. I will end. At dawn, I called the police. For once, the asylum did not resist me. The clock stayed still. The mirrors held nothing. The air no longer whispered. The excavation took weeks. Experts in gloves carried each skeleton gently into daylight. Soldiers, patients, nameless figures, every one of them catalogued, examined, given back their dignity. Some were identified. Names long forgotten were spoken again. Families, generations later, were told at last where their ancestor had gone. Tears fell on coffins as flags were folded, prayers murmured, songs sung. Others could not be named, but they, too, were buried with honor. A monument was raised on the hill, and with every burial, the asylum grew quieter. The dripping ceased. The pendulum did not stir again. The mirrors showed only what they should. The shadows had left. The night the work was finished, I stood one last time before the asylum. The winter moon still shone, but softer now, its light no longer cutting but cradling. The building did not loom. It simply rested. My chest felt lighter, as though I had set down a weight I did not know I carried. And in that silence, I heard it. 3 soft knocks. Not from behind me, not from the hammers of the workers, but from below, deep in the earth. Not a warning, not a threat. A farewell. The kind of sound you make when you close a door gently, for the last time. I let the air fill my lungs. No fear, no bitterness, only the strange, solemn warmth of having been part of something I could never prove. A link, invisible, unmeasurable, but undeniable. A bond between the living and the forgotten, sealed in moonlight and stone. And I knew then, the asylum was no longer a mouth hungry for memory. It was a grave that had finally been allowed to sleep. The shadows rest for now, but stories never sleep. They wait, behind the glass, in the mist, between the ticking of the hours. One night soon, I will return to them. And when I do, you will hear their voices with me. Until then, close your eyes, drift gently, sleep well, my listener. Good night, Nines, and Idritis.